The flames painted the night sky crimson as Nora Tucker's desperate screams pierced through the roaring fire. Parowan. Udall had never witnessed such a terrifying sight, one of the largest barns in the county, engulfed in a hellish inferno with the beloved schoolteacher trapped inside. It was the summer of 1878, and what had begun as a harvest celebration had transformed into a nightmare no one would soon forget. Preston Blackwell wiped sweat from his brow as he watched the dance of fire against the dark canvas of night. The smell of burning hay and wood filled his nostrils, but it was the screaming that made his heart pound against his ribs. Without a second thought, he broke away from the stunned crowd. "Preston, no," shouted Sheriff Mills. "You'll die in there." But Preston was already running, his long strides eating up the distance between him and the blazing structure. The heat hit him like a wall as he approached, his face instantly slick with sweat, his lungs rejecting the smoke-filled air. Yet he didn't hesitate. Someone was trapped inside someone he didn't know but couldn't leave to die. The barn door had collapsed into a heap of burning timber. Preston threw his duster over his head and shoulders and charged through a gap in the flames. Inside, the air was thick and black, stinging his eyes and burning his throat with every desperate breath. "Hello," he called out, coughing violently. "Where are you? Help, I'm here." The woman's voice came from somewhere above him, barely audible over the cracking of burning wood. Preston squinted upward through the smoke. On the hayloft, a young woman with ash-streaked face and singed golden hair clung to a wooden beam surrounded by flames. The ladder that would have allowed her escape had already been consumed by fire. "Jump," he called out. "I'll catch you. I can't." She cried, clutching the beam tighter as flames licked dangerously close to her skirts. Preston's mind raced. The structure wouldn't hold much longer already. The roof beams were groaning ominously. Looking around frantically, he spotted a horse blanket that had somehow escaped the flames. He grabbed it and held it out. "You need to jump now. This whole place is coming down." The woman looked at him, terror and determination warring in her eyes. Then, as a flaming beam crashed down mere feet from her position, she made her choice. With a prayer on her lips, she leapt. Preston braced himself, arms outstretched. Her weight hit him hard, sending them both tumbling to the floor. Ignoring the pain shooting through his shoulder, he scrambled to his feet, pulled the blanket around her and lifted her into his arms. "Hold on," he shouted above the roar of the fire. The path he'd entered through was now completely engulfed. Preston turned, desperately searching for another way out as the heat intensified around them. The woman in his arms coughed violently, her face pressed against his chest. Through the smoke, he spotted a small side door, partially blocked by fallen debris. It was their only chance. Ducking low, Preston charged forward, kicking aside what he could and shouldering through the rest. They burst into the night air just as the barn's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a plume of embers skyward. Preston didn't stop running until they were a safe distance away, finally setting the woman down gently on the grass. A crowd immediately surrounded them. "Doctor." Wilson pushed through, kneeling beside the woman and checking her for injuries while someone handed Preston a canteen of water. "You're the craziest son of a gun I've ever seen," Sheriff Mills said, slapping Preston's back. "Thought for sure we'd be burying you tomorrow." Preston barely heard him, his eyes fixed on the woman being tended to by the doctor. Their gazes met across the small distance, and something passed between them, something neither of them understood yet, but both recognized as significant. "Miss Tucker's going to be fine, Doctor," Wilson announced, helping her to sit up. "Some minor burns and smoke in her lungs, but nothing permanent." "Thank you," she said to Preston, her voice raspy but her blue eyes intense. "You saved my life." Preston nodded, suddenly feeling awkward under her steady gaze. Anyone would have done the same. No, Sheriff Mills interjected. No one else was fool enough to run into that inferno. Only our new cattle hand here had that kind of courage or that kind of madness. Preston Blackwell, he said, introducing himself properly. Nora Tucker, she replied. The school teacher. She offered her hand, which he took gently, noticing the delicate burns on her fingers. Neither realized in that moment how their lives had just changed forever, how a burning barn in Parowan would be the beginning of a story neither had imagined for themselves. The next morning, Preston woke at dawn in the bunkhouse at the Sullivan Ranch where he'd been working for the past month. His lungs still burned from the smoke, and his shoulder throbbed where he'd hit the floor of the barn. But his mind was filled with images of blue eyes and golden hair. As he made his way to the wash basin, Frank Sullivan, the ranch owner, intercepted him. "Heard what you did last night, Blackwell," Sullivan said, his weathered face serious. "The whole town's talking about it." Preston shrugged, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "Just did what needed doing." Sullivan's expression softened. "That's the Tucker girl you saved. Her father used to be my foreman before he passed 2 winters ago. Good man." He paused. "Take the morning off. Go see the doctor about that shoulder." "I'm fine, Mr. Sullivan." The cattle can wait," Sullivan insisted. "That's an order, Blackwell. Get yourself checked out." Preston nodded reluctantly. In truth, the pain in his shoulder was worse than he wanted to admit. As he rode into town, the smoldering remains of the barn came into view. A small crowd had gathered, examining the damage in the harsh light of day. He dismounted outside Dr. Wilson's office, tying his horse to the post. Before he could enter, a voice called his name, "Mr. Blackwell." He turned to see Nora Tucker approaching, walking with purpose despite the bandages visible on her hands and the slight limp in her gait. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair neatly braided and hanging over one shoulder. "Miss Tucker," he greeted, removing his hat. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have any right to," she said, stopping before him. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did was—" She faltered, emotion briefly overwhelming her. "Well, I wouldn't be standing here if not for you." Preston shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just glad I was there." "As am I." She studied him, noting how he favored his left side. "You're hurt." "Just a bruise." "You're a terrible liar, Mr. Blackwell." She smiled, the expression transforming her face despite the smudges of soot still visible along her hairline. "Are you going to see Dr. Wilson?" He nodded. "Good. I'll wait and walk with you after. I'd like to hear about the man who risked his life for a stranger." Something about her directness caught Preston off guard. Women in his experience were rarely so forthright. "There's not much to tell," he said. "I'll be the judge of that." Her eyes twinkled with determination. "I'll wait right here." Dr. Wilson confirmed what Preston had suspected, a dislocated shoulder that he promptly reset with a painful jerk. After binding it tightly and giving Preston stern instructions to avoid heavy lifting for at least 2 weeks, he released him. True to her word, Nora was waiting outside. They walked together through Parowan's Main Street, an unlikely pair drawing curious glances from townsfolk. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked as they passed the general store. "Virginia originally, but I've been moving west since the war ended." "You fought," he nodded. "Confederate cavalry, not something I'm particularly proud of these days." She considered this. "And what brought you to Parowan?" "Work. I follow the cattle." He glanced at her. "And you, have you always been in Parowan?" "Born and raised," she confirmed. "My father moved here with the early Mormon settlers, though he himself wasn't of the faith. He met my mother here." A shadow crossed her face. "She passed when I was 12 and he raised me alone until 2 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Preston said quietly. "Thank you." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Mr. Blackwell, I'd like to invite you to supper. It's the least I can do." Preston hesitated. "That's kind, but not necessary. I insist." Her voice was firm. "Tonight at 6, I'm in the small yellow house at the end of Maple Street." She smiled again. "Unless you have other plans," he didn't. In his month in Parowan, Preston had kept largely to himself, riding into town occasionally for supplies but otherwise staying at the ranch. 6 o'clock, he agreed, her smile widened. "Excellent. I look forward to it." As she walked away, Preston found himself watching her longer than was proper. There was something about Nora Tucker that intrigued him, a strength behind those blue eyes that seemed at odds with her delicate appearance. The day passed slowly. Preston returned to the ranch, but, following doctor's orders, couldn't do much more than help with the lightest of tasks. By late afternoon, he was restless and decided to head back to town early. He took extra care with his appearance, bathing in the creek and putting on his cleanest shirt before riding back to Parowan. The yellow house at the end of Maple Street was small but well-maintained, with neat flower beds framing the front porch. Preston tied his horse to the fence post and approached the door, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. Nora answered his knock promptly, welcoming him with a warm smile. The house smelled of fresh bread and roasted chicken, making Preston realize how long it had been since he'd had a proper home-cooked meal. "Please, come in," she said, stepping aside. "I hope you're hungry." "Starving," he admitted, handing her the small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked on his way into town. Her face lit up. "They're beautiful. Thank you." The inside of the house was modest but comfortable, with handmade quilts draped over simple furniture and bookshelves lining one wall. A table was set for two, complete with a small vase of flowers and candles. "You live here alone?" Preston asked, then immediately regretted the question, which might seem improper. But Nora didn't seem offended. "Yes, since my father passed. It was our home and I couldn't bear to leave it." She gestured for him to sit. "The school board was generous enough to offer me my position despite my young age. I was only 20 when I started teaching. And now, 22 last spring." She brought the chicken to the table, along with dishes of vegetables and potatoes. "And you, Mr. Blackwell?" "Preston, please," he said. "I'm 31. They ate, the conversation flowing more easily than either had expected. Preston found himself telling her things he rarely shared about his childhood on a small Virginia farm, about losing his parents to typhoid when he was 18, about the war and the years of drifting afterward. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than a season or two," he admitted as they finished eating. "Always something pushing me onward." "And what pushed you to Parowan?" she asked, refilling his coffee cup. He considered the question. "Honest work. Mr. Sullivan has a reputation for fairness." He paused. "And I was tired, I suppose, of moving so much." Nora studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps you were looking for somewhere to belong." The observation struck closer to home than he was comfortable with. Preston changed the subject. "Tell me about the barn. How did the fire start?" Her expression darkened. "I don't know for certain. I was helping store some of the harvest for winter when I smelled smoke. By the time I realized what was happening, the flames had already blocked the stairs from the hayloft." She shuddered at the memory. "I've never been so frightened." "What were you doing there alone at night?" "I wasn't supposed to be alone. Thomas Weber, he owns the barn, was with me, but he'd gone to fetch more lanterns." Her brow furrowed. "It's strange. The fire spread so quickly, almost as if—" "As if what?" Preston prompted when she trailed off. Nora shook her head. "It's nothing, just my imagination." But there was uncertainty in her eyes. "Thomas lost everything in that fire, all his stored hay, farming equipment. Was anything unusual happening before the fire? She looked at him curiously. Why do you ask? Preston wasn't sure himself why he was pursuing this line of questioning. Just seems odd. Barn fires happen, but usually from lightning or a knocked-over lantern, if you were being careful. I was, she assured him. Very careful. My father always impressed upon me the dangers of fire. She hesitated. There have been tensions in town lately. The railroad is coming through and there's disagreement about where the station should be built. Thomas was vocal about keeping it away from his property. Who would benefit from his land being less valuable? Nora's eyes widened. You think someone set the fire deliberately? That's a serious accusation. I'm not accusing anyone, Preston clarified. Just thinking aloud. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, but the question of the fire lingered in both their minds. When Preston finally took his leave, Nora walked him to the door. Thank you for coming, she said. It's been a long time since I've had company for supper. Thank you for the invitation. Best meal I've had in years. She smiled, and in the soft light from the oil lamp her eyes seemed to hold a special warmth. Perhaps you could come again. Sunday after church. Preston hadn't been to church in years, but he found himself nodding. I'd like that. Their hands touched briefly as he took his hat, and both felt the subtle current that passed between them, a connection neither had anticipated but both welcomed. As Preston rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, he realized that for the first time in many years, he wasn't thinking about where he might go next. Instead, his thoughts were firmly rooted in Parowan, and with a schoolteacher with eyes the color of the summer sky. Over the next few weeks, Preston found himself spending more and more time with Nora. Sunday dinners became a regular occurrence, often followed by long walks through town or along the nearby creek. Despite his injured shoulder limiting his work at the ranch, Preston found these weeks to be among the happiest he could remember. He learned that Nora was beloved by the children she taught, that she had a gift for storytelling that kept even the most restless students engaged. He discovered her passion for books. Her small home was filled with them, and her dream of someday starting a proper library in Parowan. In turn, Nora came to know Preston as a man of few words but deep thoughts, someone whose hard exterior concealed a gentle nature. She appreciated his straightforward manner, his lack of pretense, and the respect with which he treated her opinions. Neither spoke openly of their growing feelings, but the town of Parowan certainly noticed. Whispers followed them, some approving, others less so. A drifting cowboy and the town's schoolteacher made for interesting gossip. One afternoon in late September, Preston was helping Nora carry a stack of new readers from the general store to the schoolhouse when Sheriff Mills approached them. "Afternoon, Miss Tucker Blackwell," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Got a moment, of course, Sheriff," Nora replied. "Is something wrong, maybe?" Mills glanced around before continuing, lowering his voice. "Been looking into that barn fire. Some things don't add up." Preston's interest sharpened. "What kind of things?" "Found evidence of coal oil where it shouldn't have been, and Weber says he never left any lanterns in that part of the barn." Mills fixed his gaze on Nora. "You said you were alone when the fire started," she nodded. "Yes, Thomas had gone for more lanterns. When I smelled smoke, I called out, but no one answered." "Did you see anyone else? Hear anything unusual?" Nora frowned, thinking back. "I was focused on organizing the supplies, but—" Her eyes widened slightly. "I did hear a horse. I assumed it was Thomas returning, but the hoofbeats faded away instead of coming closer." Mills nodded, as if confirming something. "Weber's got enemies. That railroad deal has folks taking sides, but burning a man's barn with someone inside." He shook his head in disgust. "That crosses a line." "Do you have suspects?" Preston asked. "A few ideas," Mills admitted. Just watch yourselves. Particularly you, Miss Tucker. If someone set that fire knowing you were inside. Surely no one would deliberately, Nora began, but stopped at the grave expressions on both men's faces. People do terrible things for money, Mills said grimly. Just be careful. After the sheriff left, Preston and Nora continued to the schoolhouse in troubled silence. As they arranged the new books on the shelves, Preston finally spoke. I don't like this, he said. If Mills is right, and someone did set that fire knowing you were in there. It seems impossible, Nora murmured. I've known most people in this town my whole life. Preston set down the book he was holding and turned to her. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while. Just until Mills gets to the bottom of this. Leave my home. She shook her head firmly. No, I won't be driven away by fear. At least let me check on you in the evenings. Her expression softened. You're worried about me. Of course I am, he said, more vehemently than he'd intended. The thought of anything happening to her was suddenly unbearable. Nora stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his arm. I appreciate your concern, truly. She took a deep breath. But I can't live in fear, Preston, I won't. He covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers contrasting with her smooth skin. Then at least promise you'll be careful. Keep your doors locked. Don't go anywhere alone after dark. She nodded. I promise. Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Preston was intensely aware of her closeness, of the faint scent of lavender that seemed to surround her. Without conscious thought, he leaned closer. The schoolhouse door banged open, causing them to step apart quickly. A young boy of about 10 burst in, then stopped abruptly, looking between them with curious eyes. Sorry, Miss Tucker, he said. Didn't know you had company. Nora smoothed her skirt, her cheeks flushed. That's quite all right, Jimmy. What can I do for you? As Nora dealt with Jimmy's question about tomorrow's spelling test, Preston moved to the window, trying to collect himself. The intensity of what he'd just felt had caught him off guard. In all his years of drifting, he'd never encountered anyone who affected him the way Nora Tucker did. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because for the first time, he could envision a future in one place here in Parowan. Terrifying because such a future depended on feelings he wasn't sure were reciprocated. What was more, the sheriff's news had unsettled him deeply. The thought that someone might have deliberately endangered Nora made his blood run cold. If Mills was right, she could still be in danger. After Jimmy left, Preston helped Nora finish arranging the books. The easy comfort between them had returned, though both were acutely aware of the moment that had passed. Would you like to stay for tea? Nora asked as they prepared to leave the schoolhouse. Preston nodded. I'd like that. They walked to her home in the golden light of late afternoon, discussing the harvest festival planned for the following month. As they rounded the corner onto Maple Street, Preston suddenly grabbed Nora's arm, pulling her to a stop. What is it? She asked, startled. He pointed silently toward her house. The front door stood ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. Did you lock it when we left? Yes, she whispered, her face paling. I always do. Preston stepped in front of her protectively. Stay here, Preston, please. His eyes met hers, conveying the seriousness of the situation. Let me check first. Reluctantly, she nodded. Preston approached the house cautiously, wishing he had a weapon beyond the small knife at his belt. Reaching the porch, he listened carefully before pushing the door fully open with his foot. The interior of the house was in disarray. Drawers had been pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor. Books had been swept from shelves, and a small writing desk had been overturned. Moving carefully through the rooms, Preston confirmed the house was empty before returning to Nora, who waited anxiously by the garden gate. "Someone broke in," he told her, keeping his voice steady despite his anger. "Search the place. Nothing appears to be burning or damaged beyond the mess, but you should check if anything's missing." Nora's hand went to her throat. "Why would anyone?" "I don't know," Preston said grimly, "but I think we should talk to Sheriff Mills right away." The sheriff arrived quickly, examining the house with growing concern. Nora confirmed that nothing of value seemed to be missing, not her mother's silver or the small amount of money she kept hidden in a jar. They were looking for something specific, Mills concluded. Something they didn't find. "But what?" Nora asked, bewildered. "I don't have anything worth stealing." Mills turned to Preston. "Blackwell, can you stay with Miss Tucker tonight? I don't like the feel of this, especially coming so soon after the fire." Preston nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I'll ask around town, see if anyone noticed anything suspicious," Mills promised. "In the meantime, don't tell anyone about this. If whoever did this thinks you have something they want." The implication hung heavily in the air as the sheriff departed. Preston helped Nora restore order to her home, neither speaking much as they processed the violation of her personal space. When everything was back in place, Nora made tea, her hands trembling slightly as she poured. "Thank you," she said quietly as they sat at her kitchen table, "for staying." "I wouldn't be anywhere else," he replied honestly. She studied him over the rim of her cup. "You know, when you first came to town, people said you were just another drifter, that you'd be gone with the first winter snow." "That was the plan," he admitted. "And now?" Preston met her gaze directly. "Now I'm not so sure." The confession hung between them, significant in its simplicity. "I'm glad," Nora said softly. As darkness fell, they established that Preston would sleep on the sofa in the small sitting room, positioned to see both the front and back doors. After ensuring all windows and doors were securely locked, they bid each other good night. Preston lay awake for hours, listening to the night sounds of the house and the occasional hoofbeats or voices from the street. His shoulder ached from the day's activities, but his mind was too alert to notice the discomfort. He was just beginning to drift off when a faint creak from the back porch brought him instantly alert. Silently, he rose and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. A shadowy figure stood on the porch, working at the door lock with some kind of tool. Without hesitation, Preston grabbed his boots and knife, slipping toward Nora's bedroom to wake her. She came alert instantly at his whispered warning. "Someone's trying to break in through the back door," he told her. "Get dressed quickly. We need to leave." Nora nodded, fear evident in her eyes but her movements purposeful as she grabbed a shawl and shoes. They moved silently through the house, Preston leading them toward the front door. Just as they reached it, a crash sounded from the back. The intruder had broken through. "Go," Preston urged, pulling open the front door and practically pushing Nora onto the porch. They ran into the street, heading toward the sheriff's office a few blocks away. Behind them, a shout indicated they'd been spotted. The sound of boots pounding after them propelled them faster. Preston grabbed Nora's hand, pulling her down a side alley to throw off their pursuer. They emerged onto another street where thankfully a wagon was passing. "Help!" Preston called, flagging down the driver. "We need to get to the sheriff," the driver, an older man Preston recognized from the general store, took in their disheveled appearance and the urgency in Preston's voice. He stopped the wagon immediately. "Get in," he ordered, helping Nora up before Preston swung aboard. The wagon lurched forward, picking up speed as they explained the situation. Looking back, Preston caught a glimpse of a figure at the mouth of the alley, watching them flee. Sheriff Mills was at his desk despite the late hour, reviewing wanted posters by lamplight. He jumped to his feet as they burst in. "Someone broke into Miss Tucker's house again," Preston explained breathlessly. They chased us when we fled. Mills immediately took charge, sending a deputy to gather a search party and another to escort the driver home safely. He then focused his attention on Nora. "Miss Tucker, I need you to think carefully. Is there anything at all that someone might believe you possess? Documents, information, something your father might have left behind." Nora shook her head, clearly bewildered. Then, suddenly, her expression changed. "My father's journal," she said slowly. "Before he died, he told me to keep it safe. I never understood why it just seemed to contain his thoughts and observations." "Where is it now?" Mills asked urgently. "Hidden in the false bottom of my mother's sewing box," she replied. "I checked earlier, it's still there." Mills and Preston exchanged looks. "Your father was my foreman for years," Mills said. "He rode all over this territory, knew every inch of land for 50 miles. If someone thinks he discovered something valuable—" "Gold," Preston suggested, "or a rich vein of silver." "Possibly," Mills agreed. "We need to see that journal." The sheriff insisted they wait until daylight to return to Nora's house, offering her the use of a small room at the back of the jailhouse for the night. Preston refused to leave, choosing instead to keep watch from a chair outside her door. As dawn broke over Parowan, a search party returned with news they'd found no sign of the intruder, but discovered fresh horse tracks leading north out of town. Under Sheriff Mills' protection, Nora and Preston returned to her house. The place had been torn apart even more thoroughly than before, with floorboards pried up and furniture slashed open. Nora went straight to her mother's sewing box, opening a cleverly disguised compartment in the bottom to reveal a leather-bound journal. "It's still here," she said with relief, handing it to the sheriff. Mills flipped through the journal, his brow furrowing as he read. "Most of this is just daily observations, ranch business." He paused, his expression changing. "Wait, here's something." He read aloud. "Found something today that could change everything. Not safe to write details. Map in my special place, and we'll know." All eyes turned to Nora, who looked stunned. "And that's me, but I don't know what special place he meant." Preston studied her face. "Think, Nora. Was there somewhere that was significant to you and your father? Somewhere only you would know about?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. "There was a place, by the creek where we used to fish. He carved our initials into a tree there when I was little." Her eyes flew open. "That has to be it." Within the hour, they were riding toward the creek, Nora leading the way with Preston and Sheriff Mills flanking her. The autumn day was cool and bright, the aspens turning golden along the mountainsides. Under different circumstances, it would have been a pleasant outing. They tethered their horses near the creek and continued on foot, Nora moving with increasing certainty as memories guided her steps. Finally, she stopped beside an ancient cottonwood tree. "Here," she said, pointing to where JT plus NT had been carved into the bark, the letters weathered but still visible. "This is our spot." Preston examined the tree carefully. "Look for any signs of disturbance around the base," he suggested. "If he hid something, there might be marks." They searched methodically, finding nothing until Nora gave a small cry of discovery. "The hollow! I'd forgotten." She reached into a cavity in the trunk, feeling around until her fingers closed on something. Slowly, she withdrew a metal box, small enough to fit in her palm. With trembling fingers, she opened it to reveal a folded piece of paper. Sheriff Mills carefully unfolded what proved to be a crudely drawn map, with an X marked at what appeared to be a location in the mountains north of Parowan. "Silver," Mills breathed, pointing to a note scrawled in the margin. "Your father found a silver deposit. Why wouldn't he have claimed it himself?" Nora wondered. "The date," Preston pointed out. "This is dated just 2 weeks before your father passed away. He must have fallen ill before he could act on it." Mills studied the map intently. This location. It's on land that's being disputed for the railroad right-of-way. If someone knew about this, it would explain why they want this map so badly, Preston finished, and why they were willing to burn down Weber's barn. It's connected to the dispute. We need to take this to the territorial judge, Mills decided. With this evidence, we can stop the railroad deal until we determine who's behind these attacks. He carefully refolded the map. Miss Tucker, I'd advise you to stay somewhere safe until we sort this out. Whoever is after this map clearly doesn't mind hurting people to get it. She can stay at the ranch, Preston offered. Sullivan has plenty of space and no one would look for her there. Mills nodded approvingly. Good idea. I'll head to Cedar City today to wire the judge. He placed the map securely in his breast pocket. Let's get back to town and make arrangements. As they mounted their horses, Preston moved his closer to Nora's. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, though her face was pale. I just can't believe my father discovered something so valuable, and now it's caused all this trouble. It's not your fault, Preston assured her, and it's going to be all right. We'll keep you safe. The look she gave him was filled with trust, warming him despite the chill in the air. I know you will. The ride back to town was tense, all three alert for any sign of danger. As they approached Parowan, they were met by one of Mills' deputies riding hard in their direction. Sheriff, he called, reining in his horse. There's been trouble at the Weber place. They spurred their horses, following the deputy to the Weber farm on the outskirts of town. A crowd had gathered outside the house, where Thomas Weber sat on the porch, a bloody bandage around his head. What happened? Mills demanded, dismounting. Two men jumped me when I was checking the ruins of my barn, Weber explained, his voice shaky. Said they wanted to know where Nora Tucker was keeping her father's papers. When I told them I didn't know anything about it, they pistol whipped me and said they'd be back. Mills swore under his breath. Did you recognize them? Weber shook his head, then winced at the movement. Never seen them before, but one had a scar across his cheek and the other was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Preston and Mills exchanged meaningful glances. The description matched a pair of notorious hired guns known to operate in the territory. Professional troublemakers, Mills muttered. Someone's paying good money to find that map. And now they know we have it, Preston added grimly. The decision was made quickly. Nora would go immediately to the Sullivan Ranch under Preston's protection. Sheriff Mills would take the map to Cedar City with an armed escort of deputies, while the town would be put on alert for the 2 strangers. As Preston helped Nora gather a few necessities from her house, the atmosphere between them was charged with unspoken emotions. The danger had brought their feelings into sharp focus, feelings neither had fully acknowledged until now. Preston, Nora said softly as she folded a dress into a small valise. I'm scared. He moved to her side, gently turning her to face him. I know, but you're not alone in this. Because of my father's discovery, people have been hurt. The barn, Thomas. Her voice trembled. What if someone else gets hurt? What if you don't? He interrupted, placing a finger gently against her lips. Nothing's going to happen to me. The touch sent a current through them both. Slowly, deliberately, Preston leaned forward, his intention clear in his eyes. Nora met him halfway, her lips soft against his as they shared a first kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they parted, Preston kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. I've wanted to do that since the night of the fire, he admitted. Why didn't you? She whispered. I didn't think I had the right. A drifter with nothing to offer a woman like you. Nora placed her hand against his cheek. You have more to offer than you know, Preston Blackwell. The moment was interrupted by the sound of hooves outside. Sheriff Mills called through the door that it was time to leave. The ride to the Sullivan Ranch was tense but uneventful. Frank Sullivan welcomed them warmly, immediately offering Nora the use of his daughter's old room, vacant since she'd married and moved to Salt Lake City. "Anyone comes looking for trouble, they'll find more than they bargained for," Sullivan assured them, patting the shotgun he kept mounted above the fireplace. "Miss Tucker will be safe here." Preston thanked him, then went to settle Nora in her temporary room. As she unpacked her few belongings, he found himself reluctant to leave her, even for the short distance to the bunkhouse. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he promised. She smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Thank you for everything." He wanted to say more, to tell her how in just a few short weeks she had become the center of his world, how the thought of her in danger made him feel almost physical pain. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand before leaving. That night, despite his exhaustion, Preston slept fitfully. Every sound from the ranch house brought him alert, hand reaching for the revolver he'd placed beside his bunk. By dawn, he'd given up on sleep entirely, instead taking up position on the porch where he could see anyone approaching. The day passed quietly. Nora spent most of it indoors, helping Mrs. Sullivan with household tasks to keep her mind occupied. Preston divided his time between his regular ranch duties and keeping watch, his shoulder protesting but his determination unwavering. By evening, they received word that Sheriff Mills had safely reached Cedar City and sent the telegram to the territorial judge. The judge would arrive within 3 days to investigate the matter personally. 3 days, Nora murmured as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "It seems both too long and not long enough." Preston understood her meaning. 3 days of waiting, of looking over their shoulders. But also 3 days before a resolution that might mean the end of his reason for staying in Parowan. "What will you do after?" he asked carefully. "If your father's claim proves valuable, you could go anywhere, do anything." She turned to look at him, her expression serious in the fading light. "Is that what you think I want, to leave Parowan?" "It's what most people would want." Nora shook her head. "I'm not most people. This is my home. My work is here, my memories." She hesitated, then added softly, "And now there's you." The simple declaration made Preston's heart race. "Nora!" A shout from one of the ranch hands interrupted whatever he had been about to say. The man was running toward the house, pointing back toward the road. Riders coming, armed men. Preston was on his feet instantly, pulling Nora up with him. "Get inside," he urged, pushing her toward the door. "Tell Sullivan." As Nora disappeared into the house, Preston strode to meet the approaching rider, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. By the time the horseman reached the yard, Sullivan had emerged from the house, shotgun in hand, with 3 ranch hands flanking him. The rider reined in his horse, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. With a jolt, Preston recognized Deputy Marshall from Sheriff Mills' office. "Blackwell," Marshall called, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God I found you. There's trouble." "What happened?" Preston demanded. "The sheriff's party was ambushed on the way to Cedar City," Marshall explained grimly. "Mills is wounded, 2 deputies dead, and they got the map." Sullivan swore colorfully. "How bad is Mills?" "He'll live, but he won't be chasing anyone for a while. He sent me to warn you the men who did it are heading this way. They know Miss Tucker is here." Preston's blood ran cold. "How many?" "4 at least, well armed. Led by a man named Silas Garrett." The name hit Preston like a physical blow. Silas Garrett was notorious throughout the territory, a ruthless businessman who used violence and intimidation to expand his interests, particularly in mining and railroads. "How long do we have?" Sullivan asked. Marshall shook his head. Not long. I rode hard, but they won't be far behind. Sullivan took charge immediately, ordering the hands to secure the ranch house and outlying buildings. Women and children were gathered in the main house, while men took up defensive positions. Preston found Nora in the kitchen, her face pale but composed as she helped Mrs. Sullivan prepare bandages and water, anticipating casualties. "You heard?" he asked quietly, drawing her aside. She nodded. "It's Garrett, isn't it? He's the one who's been after my father's map all along." "Seems that way," Preston confirmed. "It makes sense. He's been trying to control the railroad's path through the territory. A silver deposit would give him even more leverage." "And now he has the map," Nora said, her voice hollow. "All of this, the fire, the break-ins, people hurt and killed for nothing." Preston took her hands in his. "Not for nothing. The map alone doesn't prove anything. The judge will still want to hear your testimony about your father's discovery. Without that, Garrett can't legally claim the silver." Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes. "That's why they're coming here. They still need me." "And they won't get you," Preston vowed, his grip on her hands tightening. "I promise you that." The hours that followed were tense with anticipation. Night fell, casting the ranch in darkness broken only by carefully placed lanterns that illuminated the approaches without exposing the defenders' positions. Preston insisted that Nora remain in an interior room with Mrs. Sullivan and the other women, away from windows and potential gunfire. She protested initially, wanting to help, but eventually agreed when he pointed out that keeping her safe was their primary goal. Just after midnight, a ranch hand on lookout spotted movement along the southern approach to the property. Sullivan quietly distributed the defenders, placing Preston near the house where he could respond quickly if the intruders somehow breached their perimeter. The first shots came without warning, a volley of rifle fire that splintered wood and shattered windows. The defenders returned fire, the exchange brief but intense. Then came a voice from the darkness. "Sullivan, we know you're harboring Nora Tucker. Send her out and no one else needs to get hurt." "Go to hell, Garrett," Sullivan shouted back. "You're trespassing on my property." "Be reasonable, Sullivan," the voice replied. "This isn't your fight. We just want the girl and any papers she has from her father. Then we'll be on our way." "Not happening." Sullivan punctuated his refusal with a blast from his shotgun. The response was another barrage of gunfire, more sustained this time. One of the ranch hands cried out as a bullet found its mark, and Preston moved to drag the injured man to safety. As the gunfight intensified, Preston became aware of a new danger: the smell of smoke. Looking toward the barn, he saw flames beginning to lick at the structure. "Fire!" he shouted. "They're trying to burn us out," Sullivan cursed, dividing his men between fighting the fire and continuing to defend the house. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Preston made his way back to the house, finding Nora already in the kitchen, filling buckets with water despite his instructions to stay hidden. "The barn's on fire," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Just like before, the parallel wasn't lost on Preston. "We need to get you out of here," he decided. "If Garrett's men breach the perimeter while we're fighting the fire." "Where would we go?" Preston thought quickly. "The old line shack up in the hills. It's isolated, easily defendable. We could hold out there until help arrives from Cedar City." Nora nodded, her trust in him absolute. "When?" "Now, while they're focused on the barn." He turned to Mrs. Sullivan. "We need 2 horses and supplies if you can spare them." The older woman moved efficiently, gathering food and a medical kit while Preston slipped out to prepare the horses. The gunfire had lessened as men from both sides focused on the burning barn, Sullivan's hands trying to save it, Garrett's men using it as a distraction. Preston led 2 horses to the back of the house, where Nora waited with a small bundle of supplies. Helping her mount, he gave quick instructions. "Stay low in the saddle. Follow me closely. If we get separated, keep heading northeast into the hills. The line shack is about 5 miles up, near a stand of pine trees above a small creek." She nodded, her face resolute in the firelight. "Be careful." They slipped away from the house, using the darkness and chaos to cover their departure. For a few hundred yards, it seemed they might escape unnoticed. Then a shout went up, followed by the thunder of hooves. "They've seen us," Preston called. "Ride hard." They spurred their horses to a gallop, racing across the open rangeland toward the safety of the hills. Behind them, at least 3 riders gave chase, gaining slowly but steadily on their more heavily burdened mounts. As they reached the first rise of the foothills, a shot rang out, whistling past Preston's ear. He returned fire, not aiming to hit but hoping to slow their pursuers. The terrain grew steeper, their pace necessarily slowing as they picked their way through rocks and scrub brush. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to avoid the worst obstacles, but also made them more visible to those following. Another shot, closer this time. Preston glanced back to see 2 riders still in pursuit, the third apparently having turned back. "There's a creek ahead," he called to Nora. "We'll follow it upstream to hide our tracks." They splashed into the shallow water, the horses protesting but obeying. The sound of running water helped mask their movements as they made their way upstream, eventually leaving the creek at a rocky outcropping that wouldn't show hoofprints. For another hour they climbed, the horses growing tired but pressing on. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Preston spotted the line shack, a simple one-room structure built against a cliff face for shelter from the winter winds. They approached cautiously, but the shack appeared untouched since the last time ranch hands had used it. Inside was sparse but functional: a small stove, a narrow bunk, a table and chair, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Preston quickly secured the horses in a small lean-to at the back of the shack, then helped Nora inside. She was exhausted, her face drawn with fatigue and stress, but her eyes still held that same determination he'd come to admire. "We should be safe here for now," he told her, barring the door and checking that the single window was securely shuttered. Garrett's men would have to know exactly where to look. Nora sank onto the bunk, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. "Do you think everyone at the ranch is all right?" "Sullivan can handle himself," Preston assured her, though his own worry was evident. "And reinforcements should arrive from Cedar City soon." He busied himself starting a small fire in the stove, keeping it minimal to avoid visible smoke. As warmth slowly filled the tiny space, Nora's shivering subsided. "Try to get some rest," he suggested, taking a seat in the chair. "I'll keep watch." But Nora shook her head. "I couldn't sleep now." She looked around the small shack, her gaze settling on Preston. "Tell me something." "What?" "Anything. Something about you I don't know yet, something to take my mind off all this." Preston considered the request. There was so much of himself he hadn't shared, parts of his past he preferred to keep buried. But looking at her now, he found himself wanting to open those closed doors. "I was engaged once," he said quietly. "Before the war. Her name was Emma." Nora's eyes widened slightly. This was clearly not what she had expected. "What happened?" "I went to fight. She promised to wait." He stared into the small flames visible through the stove's grate. "She didn't. Can't blame her, really. I was gone 3 years, and the man she married instead stayed home, made a good living." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. Preston shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but after that I didn't see much point in settling down. Easier to keep moving, not get attached." "And now?" Her question hung in the air between them. He met her gaze directly. "Now I'm starting to think I was wrong." The simple statement contained multitudes. Before Nora could respond, however, the sound of a snapping twig outside brought them both to alert silence. Preston moved swiftly to the window, peering through a small gap in the shutters. In the gray light of dawn, he could make out a single figure approaching cautiously, rifle in hand. "One of Garrett's men," he whispered. "Stay back." Drawing his revolver, Preston positioned himself beside the door, waiting. The footsteps drew closer, then stopped. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, without warning, the door shuddered under a powerful kick. It held, but barely. Another kick splintered the wooden bar securing it. On the third impact, the door burst inward, and a man rushed through only to be met by Preston's fist, catching him squarely in the jaw. The intruder staggered but didn't fall. He was a big man, heavily muscled, with the scarred face Weber had described. He recovered quickly, swinging his rifle like a club toward Preston's head. Preston ducked, the rifle whistling over him to crash into the wall. He drove forward, tackling the larger man around the waist and driving him back against the doorframe. The impact knocked the wind from the intruder, but he responded with a vicious knee to Preston's side. Pain exploded through Preston's ribs. He fell back, momentarily stunned, giving his opponent time to draw a knife from his belt. "Should have minded your own business, cowboy," the man growled, advancing with the blade extended. Preston scrambled backward, looking for a weapon, anything to defend himself. The scarred man lunged, knife slashing downward only to howl in pain as Nora brought the cast iron skillet from the stove down on his arm with all her strength. The knife clattered to the floor. Preston seized the moment, diving forward to grab the fallen weapon and driving his shoulder into the intruder's midsection. They crashed to the floor together, wrestling for control. Despite his injured ribs, Preston managed to gain the upper hand, pressing the knife against the man's throat. "Where's Garrett?" he demanded. The man glared up at him, hatred in his eyes. "Close enough to make you regret this." "How many men with him?" The scarred man's silence was answer enough. Preston knocked him unconscious with a quick blow to the temple, then quickly bound his hands and feet with rope from the supplies. "Are you hurt?" Nora asked, helping Preston to his feet. He winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. "Nothing serious, but we can't stay here. If he found us, others won't be far behind." "Where can we go?" Preston thought quickly. "There's a cave system further up the mountain. The ranch hands use it sometimes when caught in storms. It's defensible and there are multiple exits." They gathered what supplies they could carry, leaving the unconscious man securely bound in the shack. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, revealing a landscape of autumn beauty that seemed at odds with their desperate situation. The climb to the caves was arduous, their horses struggling with the steep terrain. By mid-morning, however, they reached the entrance, a narrow opening partially concealed by a stand of juniper trees. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. The main chamber was large enough for them and their horses, with smaller passages leading off in several directions. Preston knew that at least two of these eventually led to other exits on the mountainside. They settled in as comfortably as possible, conserving their supplies and speaking little. The strain of their situation was beginning to show on Nora's face, though she never complained. As the day wore on with no sign of pursuit, Preston began to hope they might have evaded Garrett's men. Perhaps reinforcements had arrived from Cedar City, forcing them to abandon the chase. "What happens now?" Nora asked as they shared a meager lunch of jerky and hard biscuits. "Even if we evade Garrett, he still has the map. He can claim the silver deposit." "Not without proof of your father's discovery," Preston reminded her. And now that the judge is involved, Garrett's methods will be scrutinized. Men like him rely on intimidation, not the law. I just want it to be over, she admitted, her voice small in the echoing cave. I want to go home. Preston moved to sit beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. You will, I promise. She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. When I was trapped in that barn, I thought I was going to die, she said quietly. I was so afraid, but then you appeared, running through the flames like some kind of hero from a story. She looked up at him. Why did you do it? You didn't even know me. Preston considered the question. I could not do it, he said simply. Hearing you scream, there wasn't really a choice to make. You could have died. So could you? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I'm glad I didn't. The tenderness of the gesture, the warmth in his eyes, it was all too much for Nora's overtaxed emotions. Tears she'd been holding back spilled over, and Preston pulled her closer, letting her cry against his chest. It's all right, he murmured, stroking her hair. Let it out. When her tears finally subsided, she remained in his embrace, neither willing to break the contact. In that moment, despite the danger that still pursued them, Preston felt a sense of rightness, as if all his years of wandering had been leading him to this woman, this place. Nora, he began, his voice rough with emotion. When this is over, the sound of distant voices silenced him instantly. They both froze, listening intently. The voices grew closer, echoing strangely in the cave system. They've found us, Preston whispered, helping Nora to her feet. We need to move deeper into the caves. Gathering their few belongings, they led the horses further into the mountain, following a passage that Preston believed would eventually lead to another exit. The footing was treacherous, the darkness nearly complete except for the small lantern they'd brought from the line shack. Behind them, the voices grew louder, accompanied by the scrape of boots on stone. Garrett's men had entered the cave and were following their trail. The passage narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file, Preston leading the way with the lantern held high. The horses grew increasingly nervous in the confined space, their hooves slipping on the smooth rock. Suddenly, Preston's lead horse reared, nearly knocking him down. The lantern fell from his grasp, shattering on the stone floor and plunging them into complete darkness. Preston, Nora's voice was tight with fear. I'm here, he assured her, reaching back to find her hand. Don't move. Let your eyes adjust. They stood motionless as the faint outlines of the passage gradually became visible in the dim light filtering from somewhere ahead. The voices behind them had stopped. Their pursuers had heard the breaking glass and were being more cautious. There's light ahead, Preston whispered. Must be another entrance. Follow me, but go slowly. They inched forward, leading the reluctant horses by touch more than sight. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow they had to turn sideways to progress. Finally, they emerged into a larger chamber where faint daylight filtered through a crack in the ceiling high above. The space was large enough for them to catch their breath and consider their options. That passage continues, Preston said, pointing to where the chamber narrowed again. It should lead to an exit on the eastern face of the mountain. Before they could move, however, a voice called from the passage they'd just traversed. We know you're in there, Blackwell. Nowhere left to run. Preston pushed Nora behind him protectively, drawing his revolver. Stay back, he whispered. When I create a distraction, take the horses and follow that passage. I'll be right behind you. No, she hissed, gripping his arm. I won't leave you. Nora, please, I said no. Her voice was firm despite her fear. We stay together. Before Preston could argue further, a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the cave wall near their heads. They ducked behind a large boulder as more shots followed. Preston returned fire, aiming at the passage entrance where he'd glimpsed movement. His shots were met with a cry of pain, suggesting he'd hit one of their pursuers. "How many bullets do you have left?" Nora asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in crisis. Preston checked his revolver. "4, and a handful of spares." "Not enough," she murmured, looking around the chamber desperately, her gaze fixed on something near the ceiling. "Preston, look, that crack where the light's coming through, if we could widen it." He followed her gaze, understanding immediately. The crack appeared to be part of a natural chimney in the rock. If they could enlarge it enough to climb through, they might escape to the mountainside above. "Cover your head," he instructed, taking careful aim at the weakest point in the ceiling. His first shot brought down a shower of small rocks and dust. The second created a larger opening, sunlight streaming through more brightly. "Again," Nora urged. His third shot caused a significant section of the ceiling to collapse, creating an opening large enough for a person to climb through, albeit with difficulty. The noise had also momentarily silenced their pursuers. "The horses can't follow," Preston said. "We'll have to leave them." Nora nodded reluctantly. "What about our supplies?" "Take what you can carry." He handed her his canteen and a small bundle of food. "You go first. I'll boost you up." Another shot from the passage reminded them of the urgency of their situation. Positioning himself below the opening, Preston created a step with his interlaced fingers. Nora placed her foot in his hands, and he lifted her toward the hole in the ceiling. She caught the edge, pulling herself up with surprising strength. Rocks and dust rained down as she scrambled through the opening. "Preston, hurry," she called down, extending her hand. More shots peppered the chamber as Preston leapt, catching the edge of the opening with his fingers. Pain shot through his injured ribs, but he gritted his teeth and pulled himself upward, Nora grabbing his arm to help. They collapsed together on the mountainside, breathing heavily. The opening they'd emerged from was a narrow fissure in a rocky outcropping, hidden from below by scrub brush and small trees. Below them, angry voices echoed from the cave. Preston rolled to his feet, pulling Nora with him. "They'll find a way up soon," he said. "We need to keep moving." They set off along the ridge, staying low to avoid being spotted from below. The terrain was rough but passable, the mountain gradually sloping down toward the valleys to the east. By mid-afternoon, they'd put considerable distance between themselves and the cave. Pausing to rest in the shelter of a stand of aspens, they shared the last of their water and food. "We should reach the valley by nightfall," Preston said, studying the landscape below. "From there, we can make our way to Cedar City. That's where the judge will be." Nora nodded, too exhausted for more than simple agreement. The past days had taken their toll. She was pale, her clothes dirty and torn, dark circles under her eyes. "Rest a little," Preston suggested. "I'll keep watch." She didn't argue, leaning against a tree trunk and closing her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep, her features softening in repose. Preston kept vigilant guard, scanning the mountain behind them for any sign of pursuit. His own exhaustion was profound, but concern for Nora kept him alert. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the landscape in gold and shadow, Preston gently woke Nora. They needed to reach more hospitable terrain before darkness made travel dangerous. The descent was easier than their earlier climb, though still challenging in their weakened state. As twilight deepened around them, they reached the foothills, where the terrain opened into meadows interspersed with stands of oak and maple. "Look," Nora said suddenly, pointing ahead. "Smoke." A thin column of smoke rose from a small homestead, nestled in a protected valley about a mile distant. The sight of possible shelter and help renewed their energy, and they quickened their pace. As they approached the homestead, a modest cabin with a barn and corral. Preston motioned for Nora to wait at the edge of the clearing while he investigated. The place appeared peaceful enough, with a horse in the corral and chickens scratching in the yard, but caution had kept them alive this far. He approached openly, not wanting to appear threatening. When he was halfway to the cabin, the door opened and an elderly man stepped out, shotgun in hand but not raised. "That's far enough, stranger," the man called. "State your business." "My name is Preston Blackwell," he replied, keeping his hands visible. "My companion and I are in trouble. We need help." The old man squinted at him suspiciously. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where men with guns are trying to kill us," Preston said bluntly. "We've been on the run for 2 days. We're exhausted, hungry, and my friend is a woman who's been through hell. All we're asking for is food, water, and maybe a place to rest for a few hours." The old man considered this, then lowered his shotgun slightly. "This woman, she in trouble with the law?" "No, sir. She's a school teacher from Parowan. The men after us are working for Silas Garrett." At the mention of Garrett's name, the old man's expression hardened. "Garrett, is it? That snake tried to force me off this land 3 years ago." He jerked his head toward the cabin. "Bring your friend. Any enemy of Garrett's is welcome here." Preston signaled to Nora, who emerged from the trees and crossed the clearing to join them. The old man, who introduced himself as Ezekiel Harper, ushered them inside, where a fire burned in the hearth and a pot of stew simmered on the stove. "My Emma's gone these 5 years," Harper explained as he ladled stew into bowls for them, "but I keep cooking like she might walk through that door any minute." He set the food before them. "Eat up. You both look half-starved." The stew was simple but delicious, the best thing either of them had tasted in days. As they ate, Preston explained their situation: Nora's father's discovery, Garrett's pursuit, and their desperate flight through the mountains. Harper listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if confirming something to himself. When Preston finished, the old man rose and retrieved a map from a drawer. "Cedar City's a good 15 miles from here," he said, pointing to their location. "But there's a problem. To get there, you'll have to cross open country, nowhere to hide if Garrett's men are watching the approaches." He traced a route with his finger. "There's a stage stop about 5 miles south. If you can reach it by noon tomorrow, you can catch the Cedar City stage." "We'd need horses," Preston said. Harper nodded. "I've got 2 I can spare, old but reliable." "We can't ask you to risk," Nora began. "You're not asking, miss. I'm offering." Harper's weathered face creased in a smile. "Besides, any chance to put a burr under Garrett's saddle is worth taking." With the immediate need for food and rest satisfied, exhaustion claimed them both. Harper insisted they take his bed while he slept in a chair by the fire, keeping watch with his shotgun across his lap. Despite their protests, they were too tired to argue effectively. The small bedroom was simple but clean, the bed narrow but comfortable. "You take it," Preston told Nora. "I'll sleep on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We're both adults and we're both exhausted. The bed is big enough." Too tired to argue, Preston stretched out beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the limited space. But as the night deepened, Nora moved closer, seeking warmth and comfort in his presence. He wrapped an arm around her and they slept that way, finding peace despite the danger that still pursued them. They woke at first light, refreshed despite the brevity of their rest. Harper had breakfast waiting: cornbread, coffee, and the remainder of last night's stew. As they ate, he outlined his plan. "You'll take the south trail down to the stage road," he explained. "It's less traveled and the brush provides good cover. The stage is due at the stop around noon. You'll have to pay for passage, but it's the safest way to Cedar City." "We don't have money," Preston admitted, Harper reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Take this. Should cover the fare and then some." "We can't," Nora protested. "You can and you will," Harper insisted. "Consider it my contribution to Garrett's downfall." They couldn't refuse such generosity. With renewed determination, they prepared to leave, Harper providing them with food for the journey and fresh canteens of water. The horses he offered were indeed old, but, as promised, steady and reliable. As they mounted, Harper handed Preston a rifle. "Just in case," he said grimly. "Aim true if you need to." With heartfelt thanks, they set off along the trail Harper had indicated. The morning was cool and clear, the autumn sun casting long shadows as it rose over the mountains to the east. They rode cautiously, alert for any sign of pursuit, but the trail remained deserted. By mid-morning, they'd covered several miles, the terrain gradually leveling out as they approached the stage road. "You think we'll make it?" Nora asked as they paused to rest the horses. Preston nodded. "Harper said the stage stop is just ahead, if we reach it by noon." "And then what?" She looked at him, her expression serious. "When we reach Cedar City, when this is all over, what happens then?" He understood the real question behind her words. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether a school teacher from Parowan might have room in her life for a drifter who's finally found a reason to stay put." The smile that lit her face was answer enough, but she gave him words as well. "I think she might. In fact, I'm certain of it." The moment was perfect, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the mountains rising majestically behind them, and Nora looking at him with such hope and affection. Preston leaned across the space between their horses, one hand cupping her cheek as he kissed her softly. When they parted, both were smiling, despite the danger that still shadowed them. For the first time, Preston allowed himself to truly believe in a future, one that included Nora Tucker and a home in Parowan. Their moment of peace was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats, several horses, approaching rapidly from the direction they'd come. "Garrett's men," Preston said grimly. "They must have picked up our trail." Without further discussion, they spurred their horses forward, abandoning caution for speed. The stage road came into view ahead, a ribbon of dusty earth cutting through the landscape. Following it south, they could see the stage stop in the distance, a small cluster of buildings beside a creek. Behind them, the pursuing riders appeared on the ridge they'd just descended, raising a shout as they spotted their quarry. Shots rang out, falling well short but emphasizing the danger. "They're gaining," Nora called, her voice tight with fear. It was true. Their older mounts, already tired from the morning's journey, couldn't match the speed of the fresh horses their pursuers rode. "The stage stop," Preston urged. "If we can reach it, there might be help." They pushed their horses harder, the animals responding valiantly despite their exhaustion. The stage stop grew larger ahead, a main building, stables, and a corral where fresh horses waited for the stage. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. A bullet whistled past Preston's head, uncomfortably close. Another struck the ground near Nora's horse, causing the animal to shy violently. She managed to keep her seat, but the near fall cost them precious time. As they thundered into the yard of the stage stop, Preston shouted for help. A few men emerged from the main building, startled by the commotion. "Garrett's men," Preston called, pointing back at their pursuers now visible on the road. "They're trying to kill us." The name Garrett seemed to have the same effect here as it had with Harper. The men immediately took defensive positions, one running for the stables while another helped Nora dismount. "Stage is due any minute," one man informed them. "We'll hold them off till then." True to his word, gunfire erupted as Garrett's men approached, forcing them to take cover behind rocks and trees at the edge of the clearing. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Then, from the south, came the welcome sound of the stage, the rumble of wheels and the crack of the driver's whip, urging the team to greater speed. The stagecoach thundered into the yard, the driver pulling the horses to a sharp halt as he assessed the situation. A man leaned out of the coach window, a star visible on his chest. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Marshal," Preston called, recognizing the badge of federal authority. "Those men work for Silas Garrett. They've been trying to kill us to get a map to a silver deposit." The marshal's face hardened. He stepped down from the coach, followed by two deputies. "Garrett, is it? Been wanting to have a word with him and his men for some time." With the addition of the lawmen, the balance of power shifted decisively. Garrett's men, outnumbered and outgunned, surrendered after a brief but intense exchange of gunfire. One was wounded, but none were killed, a mercy Preston hadn't expected but was grateful for. As the marshal's deputies secured the prisoners, Preston and Nora told their story: the barn fire, the break-ins, Sheriff Mills' ambush, and their desperate flight through the mountains. "The territorial judge is in Cedar City now," the marshal confirmed. "He'll want to hear all this directly. And I've got some questions for these fellows about their employer." He glanced at the bound men with a grim satisfaction. "Garrett's been operating outside the law for years. Maybe now we've got what we need to stop him." The journey to Cedar City passed without incident, though the stagecoach was considerably more crowded with the addition of the prisoners. Preston and Nora sat close together, drawing strength and comfort from each other's presence. Upon arrival, they were taken directly to the hotel where the territorial judge had established his temporary court. To their relief, Sheriff Mills was there, his arm in a sling but otherwise recovered from the ambush. "Thought you two might be dead," he admitted, embracing Nora with his good arm and shaking Preston's hand firmly. "When Garrett's men didn't return, we had help," Preston explained, briefly recounting their escape through the caves and Harper's assistance. Judge Harmon proved to be a stern but fair man, listening intently to their testimony and examining the map Mills had managed to protect despite the ambush. The evidence, combined with the statements of Garrett's captured men, who proved willing to talk in exchange for leniency, was damning. "I'm issuing a warrant for Silas Garrett's arrest," Harmon announced, "and I'm placing the disputed land under federal protection until ownership can be properly determined." He looked at Nora. "As your father's only heir, Miss Tucker, you have a strong claim to any mineral rights discovered on that property." Nora seemed overwhelmed by the implication. "I never expected." "Justice often comes with unexpected consequences," the judge observed with a slight smile. "The marshal will escort you back to Parowan when you're ready. I understand Mr. Sullivan's ranch suffered damage during the conflict." "Yes, Your Honor," Preston confirmed. "Garrett's men set fire to the barn. The court will ensure appropriate compensation," Harmon assured them. "And Miss Tucker, when the silver claim is settled, you may find yourself a wealthy woman." The full impact of this statement didn't register immediately. After days of fear and flight, the sudden resolution of their ordeal and the potential change in Nora's circumstances seemed almost unreal. They spent the night in Cedar City, given rooms at the hotel courtesy of the court. For the first time in days, they were able to bathe, change into clean clothes provided by the hotel's staff, and eat a proper meal. As they sat together in the hotel dining room, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The danger was past. Garrett was being pursued by federal marshals. The barn fire and break-ins would be fully investigated. And Nora stood to inherit a silver claim potentially worth a small fortune. "It doesn't seem real," she said, echoing Preston's thoughts. A week ago, I was just a school teacher with a small house and simple dreams. And now, he asked, uncertain suddenly of his place in her future. She reached across the table to take his hand. Now I'm still a school teacher with a small house, but my dreams. She smiled, squeezing his fingers. Those have grown considerably. Relief flooded through him. I was afraid with the silver claim that I'd forget about the cowboy who ran through flames to save me. She shook her head. Not likely, Preston Blackwell. The next morning, they began the journey back to Parowan, accompanied by Sheriff Mills and a deputy marshal. The territory that had seemed so threatening during their flight now appeared peaceful and beautiful, the autumn colors at their peak against the backdrop of mountains and sky. They reached Parowan late in the afternoon, riding directly to Nora's house, which had been secured and cleaned in her absence. News of their return spread quickly, and soon neighbors began arriving with food, offers of help, and eager questions about their ordeal. Frank Sullivan arrived with his wife, both expressing profound relief at their safe return. "The ranch is already being repaired," Sullivan assured them, "and I hear tell you might be coming into some money, Miss Tucker." "Nothing's certain yet," Nora demurred. "But regardless, I intend to continue teaching. The children need education more than I need riches." Her response earned approving nods from the townsfolk. Preston watched her with growing admiration as she graciously received their visitors, her natural dignity and kindness evident in every interaction. As evening fell and the last of the visitors departed, Preston found himself alone with Nora on her front porch. The events of the past days had created an intimacy between them that transcended conventional courtship, yet there remained unspoken questions about their future. "I should let you rest," he said, reluctant to leave but aware of propriety. Nora studied him in the fading light. "Preston, these past days have shown me something important." "What's that?" "Life is unpredictable, dangerous sometimes." She stepped closer, her eyes steady on his, "and far too short to waste time on conventions that keep people apart." He understood her meaning instantly. "Nora, I don't have much to offer. Even with Sullivan's job, I don't care about that," she interrupted. "I care about you, the man who risked his life for a stranger, who protected me through fire and gunfire and caves and mountains." Her voice softened. "The man I've fallen in love with." The declaration, so simply stated, left him momentarily speechless. When he found his voice, the words came from the deepest part of his heart. "I love you too. I think I have since that night at the barn when I saw you standing in the flames, refusing to give up." He took her hands in his. "I've been a drifter my whole adult life, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But here, with you, I've found something worth staying for." Their kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, a promise and a commitment all at once. When they parted, both were smiling, the joy of newfound love outshining the trauma of recent days. "Stay tonight," Nora whispered. I mean the sofa. I don't want to be alone." "I'll stay as long as you want me," Preston replied. And they both knew he wasn't just talking about that night. In the months that followed, life in Parowan gradually returned to normal. Silas Garrett was eventually captured trying to flee to Mexico and brought to justice for his crimes. The silver deposit proved significant, though not as vast as initially hoped, enough to provide Nora with financial security, but not the immense wealth Judge Harmon had suggested. Preston continued working for Sullivan, earning a promotion to foreman when the previous one retired. He and Nora courted properly under the approving eyes of the community, though everyone understood their relationship had been forged in fire literally, and was stronger for it. By the following spring, with apple blossoms scenting the air, Preston and Nora were married in the small church in Parowan. The entire town turned out for the celebration, Sheriff Mills serving as best man and Mrs. Sullivan as matron of honor. Even Ezekiel Harper made the journey from his homestead, presenting them with a handcrafted rocking chair as a wedding gift. They built a new house on land not far from town, larger than Nora's small yellow cottage, but still modest, with plenty of room for the family they hoped to have. Preston had never imagined himself as a settled man, yet he found deep satisfaction in creating a home with Nora, in planning for a future that stretched beyond the next horizon. Nora continued teaching, using some of her silver money to establish Parowan's first proper library. The rest she invested wisely, ensuring their children would have educational opportunities she and Preston had lacked. Their first child, a son they named James after Nora's father, arrived the following winter, a healthy, robust boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's determined chin. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, completing their happiness. On the 5th anniversary of the barn fire, the event that had brought them together, Preston and Nora returned to the site, now rebuilt and functioning once more as the center of Weber's farm. The scars of that night had faded, both on the land and in their memories, replaced by the joy of the life they'd built together. As they stood hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Preston reflected on the journey that had led him here. From a rootless drifter to a man with a family, a purpose, and a place to belong. "Any regrets?" Nora asked, seeming to sense the direction of his thoughts. Preston shook his head, drawing her closer against the evening chill. "Not a single one. Running into that fire was the best decision I ever made." Nora smiled up at him, the love in her eyes as bright as it had been on their wedding day. "For me too, though next time maybe we could meet under less dramatic circumstances." "Next time," he teased. "Planning on needing rescue again, Mrs. Blackwell?" "No," she said, her expression growing serious. "But I believe souls that belong together find each other in this life and the next, and ours definitely belong together." Preston couldn't argue with that. As they turned to walk home, where their children waited under Mrs. Sullivan's watchful eye, he felt a profound gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought him to Parowan that summer night 5 years ago. The barn fire that might have ended Nora's life had instead been the beginning of something beautiful, a love story written in flames and courage, in sacrifice and determination. A story still being written with each day they spent together, building a life neither had imagined but both now treasured above all else. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Preston Blackwell, once a man with no place to call his own, walked toward home with his heart full and his wandering days far behind him.